The House will come to order. Members, today's prayer will be given by our own Representative David Faulkner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, God really calls us to do two things: to love Him and to love others. Life is short. Saw that from watching, went to a funeral of a good friend this past week. Saw it in the video of terrible tragedy on Israel. Things that make life real. We do important work here, but we need to keep in mind there's so much more to life, and how we treat each other is the most important thing that God's asked us to do while we're here. If y'all would, bow your heads with me. O God, who gave us birth, you are ever more ready to hear than we are to pray. You know our needs before we ask, and our ignorance in asking. Give to us now your grace, that as we shrink before the mystery of death, we may see the light of eternity. Speak to us once more your solemn message of life and of death. Help us to live as those who are prepared to die. And when our days here are accomplished, enable us to die as those who go forth to live, so that living or dying, our life may be in you, and that nothing in life or in death will be able to separate us from your great love. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen. Members, today's Pledge of Allegiance will be led by Charlie Harmon. He is a student at Auburn University majoring in public relations and is an intern with Chairman Lovern.
Attention, salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk, call roll.
Mr. Speaker, Allman, Baker, Bedsole, Blackshear, Bolton, Boyd, Bracey, Brinyark, Brown, Butler, Carnes, Chestnut, Clark, Klaus, Collins, Colvin, Crawford, Daniels, Drummond, DuBose, Easterbrook, Ellis, England, Ensler, Estes, Faulkner, Fiddler, Fincher, Fort, Garrett, Gidley, Gavan, Givens, Gray, Hall, Hammett, Harbison, Harrison, Hassel, Hendricks, Hill, Hulk, Jones, Hollis, Hulsey, Hurst, Ingram, Jackson, Jones, Keel, Kirkland, Lamb, Lawrence, Lee, Lipscomb, Lomax, Lovern, Marcus, McCampbell, McClammy, Mooney, Moore M, Moore P, Morris, Oliver, Paramore, Pascal, Pettis, Pringle, Rafferty, Ream, Reynolds, Rigsby, Robbins, Robertson, Rogers, Sellers, Sells, Shaver, Shaw, Shedd, Shiree, Simpson, Smith, Sorrells, Stodhagen, Standridge, Starnes, Stringer, Stubbs, Tillman, Travis, Treadaway, Underwood, Wadsworth, Warren, Whitt, Wharton, Wilcox, Wood D, Wood R, Woods, Yarborough.
"76 members have answered roll. Quorum is present. The House is ready to transact business. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Lee, Chairman Lovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request that leaves of absence be granted for absent members.
Are there any objections? Hearing no objections, absence is granted. Chair further recognizes the chairman from Lee, Chairman Lovern.
Mr. Speaker, I have a report.
House of Representatives, your Standing Committee on Rules begs leave to report that it has carefully examined the Journal of the House for the 13th legislative day and finds the same to be correct. Signed, Representative Joe Lovern, Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the reading of the journal at length for the 13th legislative day be dispensed with.
Any objections? Hearing no objection, the reading of the journal is dispensed with. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Mobile, Speaker Pro Tem Pringle, for the purpose of making announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, today is Disability Advocacy Day. The Alabama Retired State Employees Association and the Alabama Public Employees Advocacy League will host a legislative reception at the RSA Plaza from 4:30 until 7. Porch Bandit Creek Indians reception will be held tonight at Ravello starting at 5 p.m. And the House versus House softball game will be held tonight at Alabama State University Wheeler Watkins Baseball Complex from 7 to 9. Please remember tomorrow morning the ALCAP Weekly Prayer Breakfast from 7 to 8:30 in the Plaza Terrace. Prayer breakfast tomorrow morning from 7 to 8 at the Plaza.
Mr. Pringle, you're further recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I move that when we adjourn today, we leave the journal open to allow the clerk to complete his paperwork, and that we reconvene on Thursday, March 7th at 9 a.m. Thursday.
All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it, the motion prevails. Clerk now receive reports from standing committees and will receive those reports throughout the day. The House now in position to introduce bills and resolutions. The House now is in the motion, in receive resolutions and reports from Committee on Rules. Clerk will read those resolutions.
House Joint Resolution number 82 by Representative Jackson, commending Coach Carvel William Rowell Jr. for being inducted into the Thomasville High School Sports Hall of Fame. Senate Joint Resolution number 25 by Senator Sessions, mourning the death and celebrating the life of Captain Marissa Lee Futrell.
I move adoption.
All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it, the resolutions are adopted. Clerk, call the next resolution.
House Joint Resolution number 81 by Representative Shaw, establishing the Alabama-Japan Legislative Exchange Group.
Move adoption.
All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Resolution is adopted. Clerk, call next resolution. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Lee, Chairman Lovern.
Mr. Speaker, I have a resolution.
Clerk, receive the resolution.
House Resolution number 95 by the House Rules Committee, the Special Order Calendar.
Chairman Lovern, you're recognized.
Move adoption.
All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? It is adopted. Clerk, call first bill on special order calendar.
On page 17 of the calendar, Senate Bill number 159 with substitute by Senator Melson relating to in vitro immunity.
Chairwoman Collins, you're recognized.
Thank you for the recognition, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we discussed the in vitro fertilization bill extensively last week. I wanted to tell you some of the changes that have happened since then. Last week, the Senate removed manufacture of goods from that immunity, and there was a decision to not give them that criminal and civil immunity that we did on services, but we have added a part that no action suit criminal prosecution for the damage to or death of an embryo shall be brought or maintained against an individual or entity when providing or receiving. That was what we did last week. I apologize, I'm on the wrong page. Okay, here's the part that we added to this one that you may not have heard if you were not in committee. That notwithstanding any provision of the law, including any cause of action provided in Chapter 5 of the Code for damage to or death of an embryo brought against the manufacturer of goods. So services remain the same. Goods used to facilitate in vitro fertilization process of the transport of stored embryos, damages shall be limited to compensatory damages calculated as the price paid for the impacted in vitro cycle. And so Those were the biggest changes that we had, and that part applies retroactively as well. So at this time, I move to ask to adopt the BIR.
Okay, that is the question. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tuscaloosa, Representative England. While Representative England's making his way down here, would like to recognize Tammy Williams and Tanya Wooten, both of them from Sand Mountain Electric Co-op in DeKalb County, and are guests of the Speaker and the Speaker's office. It's good to have them with us today. Thank y'all for being with us.
Thank you for the recognition. So we just created more immunity
No less.
but I mean, you're creating immunity for goods and services?
No, services is what we created last time, and we included goods in that. Now we've taken that immunity to a limited immunity for the goods portion of it.
But we're giving them immunity in this process to a limited
We are
degree.
limiting what we passed last week.
Okay. All right. I'm probably not alone here, and I've only got 9 minutes, but I'm just going to be honest with you. 100% support IVF treatment, and it's unfortunate what has happened, but this is a really bad piece of legislation across the board, and let me tell you why. First and foremost, you cannot, trust me when I tell you, I'm a lawyer by trade. You cannot specifically create immunity to address enough of the issues that lawyers are paid to spot in terms of filing lawsuits. And what we're doing right now is just trying to play lawsuit whack-a-mole. Last week, as we were sitting on the House floor debating this bill, another lawsuit was filed. The purpose of that lawsuit is to directly confront the immunity that we're trying to create at this point, assuming that they can get around some procedural issues in terms of statutes, limitations, and whatnot, to procedurally confront this particular bill to determine whether or not we can create constitutional, a statute immunity to protect doctors in the event that they destroy embryos. And our legislation here provides a clear pathway for doctors in those facilities to destroy embryos. And if I'm not mistaken, if you go back and you read the constitutional amendment, it says that we can't do that. We can't. And we've already got several Supreme Court justices that have already interpreted that code section and that constitutional amendment to effectively say the same thing. We aren't providing a solution here. We're creating more problems. We have to confront the elephant in the room. And the interesting thing about that is that we've done that in the past, in the very recent past. Have you looked up the definition of child for the purpose of the Human Life Protection Act?
It was in utero.
In utero. Everybody in here voted for and voted in favor of that definition.
I don't think everybody voted for
I didn't. That's a whole other ball of wax there. But the point is, the majority of the people in this room have already agreed on the definition for child as in utero. But also, have you read the definition of abortion in that same bill?
I'm certain I have several times. I can't quote that to you.
Well, it's almost describes to a T in certain regards of what goes on in IVF clinics. Destruction of embryos. So, also, yes or no question. Are there currently IVF clinics open in Alabama right now?
I believe that there are a couple
Okay. So those,
who I believe are waiting to see what we will do. with
they're not
this
waiting, they're operating.
They are operating.
They're operating.
They are waiting to see what we are going to do about this legislation.
So the legislature today has been threatened by clinics closing and then telling us that if we don't create immunity for them, they're going to close or they're going to stay closed. Usually, in scenarios like that, when a company or a private business threatens us and say, we're not going to open unless you provide us with immunity, we don't do it. We just don't. This is a really bad precedent. And again, I'm not trying to stand in the way of anybody getting treatment. I am all for IVF treatment. But what I am not for is the intellectual dishonesty and the moral ambiguity that this legislation is creating. And if we determine that the relationship between a doctor and a patient in this regard is precious enough that the doctor and the providers and the people in the goods and services have to have some sort of immunity in order for
And the patient.
And the patient have to have some sort of immunity to do it, then what's the distinction between this particular patient-doctor relationship and all the other ones out there? If we are going to be we're not going to be in the room with this particular doctor and this patient, what's the difference between that relationship here and the one between a woman in an abortion clinic? Why is that one not protected? Or why is the relationship between a family who has a child with suffering from gender dysphoria, why is that doctor-patient relationship not protected? And it's just hard for me to imagine that there are entities outside of us powerful enough to threaten us, where we would pass a bill to give them immunity to destroy embryos.
I believe their goal is to provide embryos for families so that they can have children. Their goal is not to destroy them.
Isn't that what happens?
There are occasions, I think, in the process that does happen, but I think that's how the families that we all met last week, many of them, even some in this room, have been able to have children.
Absolutely. And again, I'm all for IVF. But this legislation and creating immunity is us dodging the problem or dodging the real issue. And again, I'm not against IVF. I'm not against the process. And the reason it doesn't bother me is because I'm intellectually consistent in the fact that I don't want doctors in the room with I don't want lawyers, and I don't want legislators in the room with anybody who's having a very private discussion with a doctor. I don't want it. And this bill essentially creates that distinction. And I really believe that we can, as a group, we should be able to come together, offer a solution. I don't want a situation where we pass a law that creates the have and the have-nots. Because essentially, if you are rich and you have the resources, you can do things in an IVF clinic that poor people can't do in an abortion clinic. And if you say you're pro-life, providing immunity to doctors where they can indiscriminately destroy embryos is not a pro-life position.
I don't believe they're indiscriminately doing that. I've been in a room full of a lot of lawyers lately.
Yeah.
And I do agree that we are creating a broad immunity. I do, with you, hope that we could work together.
We need to do that now.
Find a faster solution. This is our best solution to help the families that are in the middle of that process continue their process.
We need to do that now. And all we're doing in this process is just creating more causes of action. And you're going to find out very soon that this next lawsuit that will be filed will directly confront and compare the code section that we're creating immunity-wise, compare it to the constitutional amendment that we all have. Life in Alabama is the sanctity of life, and it begins at conception. and it is protected from the moment of conception, that providing immunity that will give doctors the blanket authority to destroy embryos, as it says in the legislation, is unconstitutional. And we're going to be right back to square one, and these folks are not going to get
Gentleman's
the
time
relief
has
that you say they're
expired.
getting.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Shelby, Representative Ellis. While he's making his way down here, we'd like to recognize Prattville Middle School. The principals, Marcus Jackson, Martin Jackson, and Crystal Sandlin. Guest of Lawrence, Starnes, and Smith. Let's give them a big hand. Thank y'all for being with us today. Chairman Ellis, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for recognition. Representative Collins, will you yield?
Yes.
Just want to come down and take a second to say thank you for your hard work. You've put a lot of hard work into this. This is a good pro-family bill is what I call it, and it's going to put families back together, and thank you so much for your hard work. You've put a lot into it. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Jefferson, Representative Sellers. Be the third person to speak on the BR.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the recognition of the lady yield. I don't have a problem with IVF in America, but I do have issue with it in Alabama. One, because in Alabama, we defined by law when life starts. And we've defined it by saying life starts at conception.
Where have we defined it?
The abortion law.
No.
And every time.
Abortion law actually says in utero.
Same thing.
No,
Same thing.
not at all.
And every time, and I guess the question has to be asked, what do you do with embryos that are not used or destroyed? And if we define when life started, then it seems to me that we are, some use the word abortion or aborting, I use killing. We kill embryos. And in the state of Alabama, that just doesn't seem right, because those who have the ability to participate in IVF measures, and then there are some that don't have the means to participate. So I'm just a little confused at this whole process, because it seems on one hand, we're being quite hypocritical, but on the other hand, it's okay if you can afford it. That's just my opinion from House District 57.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Cullman, Representative Shedd, be the fourth person to speak on the BR.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the recognition. A few days ago, we were confronted with a complicated
Kind of like deja vu. isn't it?
and I know that you and many others have worked very hard to address the problem, and we're here to solve a problem. And I look forward to the end of the day today. Hopefully, we'll leave here with a solution. And I thank you, Senator Melton, and others that have brought a lot of hard work to address this issue and solve the problem. I know families that have enjoyed children, and there'll be others that will enjoy children because of our work today, and I thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Question for the body now is the adoption of the BIR. Clerk will unlock the machine and the members will vote. Clerk will lock the machine, record the votes. 81 ayes, 10 nays, 12 abstentions. The BR has been adopted. Chairwoman Collins.
I move to adopt the sub that we did in committee yesterday.
Chair recognizes the lady from Jefferson, Representative Van, speaking on the sub.
The sub was what I read to you. That was the addition in the sub.
You don't have to look like that, Mr. Speaker, when you call my name. Listen, we're on the sub, right? Okay. Tell me about the sub.
In the Senate last week, we had passed the immunity for services and goods. The Senate took the word goods out, and so it wasn't. And so what we did is that we added back the immunity for goods, but in a more limited fashion.
Define immunity for goods.
It says the death that it says for the immunity, notwithstanding any cause, for the damage to or death of an embryo brought against the manufacturer of goods used to facilitate the in vitro fertilization process or the transport of stored embryos, damages shall be limited to compensatory damages.
So no punitive damages?
No.
Okay, so then talk to me about the degree of damages with regards to services.
Services is what we passed last week. That did not change.
Because I thought you were saying that had been stricken.
No, goods was taken out and changed to a more limited liability. The services has remained the same from last week.
So in other words, we still have a bill for which we are now going to give the doctor, the medical provider of this type of service immunity. I would like for you to define for me what makes this type of service so unique versus any other type of medical service that is rendered here in the state of Alabama by a doctor licensed by the Board of Medicine to practice medicine, that they are not immune unless now you are a doctor who deals with IVF.
I mean, I don't know every medical procedure, and I can't really answer the question. I can answer this one, that there is a process and that we are trying to address that immediate issue.
But you do know there are no other doctors that have immunity.
I don't know that. I don't know all the immunities that are out there.
You don't know that because you should know that, because we are now creating a special class for doctors who provide IVF services. They are now going to be in a distinguished class with regards to providing that service that other doctors will not be afforded the same opportunity. Again, the standard of care, you all have totally shifted the ordinary standard of care that would be applied to any other doctor for people who are doctors that practice IVF. And now let me just tell you to the IVF people, don't tweet me, don't call me, don't email me to argue a point with me about this, because I don't want to hear it. I am for IVF. Let me set the record straight. But I am also for fairness. And I have a problem with any immunity bill. And you've been here with me 10 years, 14 years, since 2010. And I have not supported not one immunity bill that we have brought here in this chamber, because I believe that situations will occur just as they will occur with this bill. Again, you can sometimes be have a cause and effect to infect the client, sometimes just by not properly sterilizing your hands.
And by adding the receiving the services, that protects that person from that issue.
Receiving the service, but it doesn't protect them from anything else within liability that the doctor may or may not, that may do to cause either death or serious bodily harm or whatever. And I don't care who's texting you and whatever, but let me just simply say this. And again, don't email me, don't tweet me, don't IG me, don't Twitter me. I do support IVF. My position is solid and will not change. I think this is a very dangerous bill for us to be adopting just for the urgency of this situation. I too agree with my colleagues. Not everybody can afford this, and as I've already stated, this is sometimes the last resort. But I'm also not in favor of supporting a bill that further deals with the issues of reproductive rights among women, and however you all are trying to incorporate your core values and beliefs through this process. I understand that there are a lot of desperate, urgency of now type of situations. Families are desperate to try their best to get pregnant or be impregnated. I have no problem with that. What I have a problem with is that we will take this situation because there has been a galvanization of people who they've gotten T-shirts, they've gotten this, they've done this, they have bombarded the State House, and I commend them. I wish that we would have that type of effort when the other issues. But my thing to you is when those other issues arise, I want us to be standing here in this well doing the same thing for them, same thing for IVF doctors, same thing for them that we do for other people or that we don't do for others. Because I have a problem with it, that we are still, you're still saying that you're limiting liability, but yet you're not putting a higher standard of care on the other side. And that has been the problem. And I don't know who you all are working with as counsel. I pay my law license dues every year. I stay in my lane with regards to what I do, but it bothers me. It's just like a case I'm representing the young man that hit Senator Joe Manchin's wife. This young man now has almost $3 million bail because he hit Senator Joe Manchin's wife, whereas he had hit you and I. There would be no issue of his bond being $3 million. So now we have a situation here where we have a special class of people for which we are now designating for the doctors to stay in business, to be able to provide the service, for the families to be able to get the service. And these doctors are now so special. And I'm just trying to figure out why all other medical doctors across the state ain't raising hell. That's number one. Because this is absolute ridiculous to me. And I don't care who likes it, that I said it, and who does not. So I was hoping the bill would have come back better, and I know you think it's better, but it really isn't. It's not. It's a train wreck waiting to happen. It's a train wreck when you don't apply a certain standard. What was wrong with at least putting the words reckless or wanton behavior in this bill? At least the bare minimum. Because what you're saying now is that if a doctor makes a mistake, if something goes wrong, he is immune from prosecution. He is immune from punitive damages. And that's what this bill does. He is immune. You stretched the compensatory damages. We got that. But you're still leaving enough. You've left just enough of a crack, but not quite enough. So, I just have a problem with it. It's me. I speak as a party of one when I stand up here. But I do have an issue with it. Go back to with the embryos. What, as it relates to, I can't remember if it was Representative Sellers in the don't Did I hear you say something about the embryos being transported?
The goods deal with that, and that's the part that we limited that liability.
The embryo then would be the good.
Well, the transportation and all, that's part of it, and the processes that come in and that they use for that.
The transportation is a good versus the embryo?
The manufacture of the goods used in the facility, and so it's all of the products that they use that are coming in and out.
But if the embryo is damaged, then what? We toss it out. Is there no liability? So you're just saying only if it's in transport through interstate
commerce? It's broad enough to say that if it's brought against the manufacturer of goods used to facilitate the in vitro fertilization process of the transport of stored embryos, damages shall be limited to compensatory
I still
damages.
say this is a free-for-all for IVF doctors. It's very unfortunate that we have other good doctors that won't get
And the lady's
help.
time has expired. Chair recognizes the lady from Madison, Representative Hall.
Thank you, Mrs. Speaker. Would the lady yield?
Yes.
Could you give me some idea of what is the process that is in place beyond this bill moving forward? What type of discussions has occurred?
I mean, I don't know the future process, but what I would like to see is have some discussions, understand the process for in vitro a little bit better, help us come together and make a solution. I think we'll need some clarification on the Supreme Court ruling. I think that we have a lot of things that have to happen as we go forward, and I don't know a timeline for that.
So the bill that we have before us, it is my understanding it is addressing the Supreme Court ruling?
It is really addressing the issue that arose because of the ruling,
right,
providing the immunity for the services and then a limited immunity for the manufacturer of the goods.
And so each time I spoke to somebody about what we did last week, because I supported it, that I thought I supported, was that they were just amazed at the type of immunity that we were given. And so, and then based on the conversations that you've heard today, we're still having that problem in terms of the immunity that's provided. And so how does this help us? Because if you recall, last time I asked a question about clinics that were still open. Those clinics, I understand, are still functioning or
There are a couple
operating.
I hear that are still functioning, but I also hear that they're waiting to see what we do with this legislation.
But they didn't wait they did not wait for a decision.
That is my understanding.
And so has there been any conversations with any of those?
We've had conversations with
those
everyone.
clinics? And what was their response?
I think all of them feel more comfortable with this legislation. It is very strong and very broad immunity. I hope that that gives us reason to come back together and continue to work on the issue. But right now, I believe we have worked together to come up with a plan that will help these families continue their in vitro fertilization process.
So from the work that was done, or the process that we are in now, those families, the clinics that were closed are still closed?
We believe that the clinics will open with this legislation.
And what's the timeline for that?
I would hope immediately. I don't know, and I would imagine each one may do things differently. That'll be theirs. The conversations that we've had trying to work together have been just along that line, and we believe that we have met in a good spot that will help them feel comfortable to open up and provide their services and help those families continue to go through the process.
So I do remember in some of the conversations there appeared to have been a need for those clinics that may have closed. Those families seem to indicate that they had some cases it might have been days, for somebody else it might have been weeks. Have we had any discussion since last week with those families if they missed that opportunity, that timeline? Has there been any discussion?
There's been lots of discussion, and I don't know of a specific case that missed it, but they are all very anxious for us to complete this.
And does there appear to be a comfort level with where we are with this bill in terms of when you talk about the lack of?
This is the best comfort level I've been able to achieve with all the different parties.
Thank you.
Chair thanks the lady. Chair recognizes the lady from Jefferson, Representative Moore. Speaking on the amendment.
I'm listening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm glad my colleague told me I need to get on down here, but let me see.
I'm listening.
Let me look around.
I'm listening.
You hear me, but you ain't listening.
I'm listening.
Let me look around. Ain't nobody listening.
I'm listening.
So I just want to get my points in the journal, whatever. But my biggest concern, and I think I've been listening, and it sounds like that same embryo that can't breathe, that doesn't have any life to it, until it is in vitro fertilized into the mother. I think I heard you call them a good
No,
and a product.
no.
Reed, I think you did.
No, I talked about.
Because the product that these people are providing are the embryos.
No, they're not providing the embryos. They're providing services for the transportation.
No, ma'am.
For the
But they, you know, the
embryo,
companies
the
that freeze
process.
these embryos, they provide them because they're frozen. You know.
Well, they may transport them. They may hold
Right,
them.
that's
they
what
may
I'm
do
saying.
different Things.
In that
But they
vein,
didn't create those embryos.
Yeah, but it sounded like at some point you talked about that group that freezes the embryos when they bring them to be inseminated, that they are providing a good. So what if they are not the good, what are the goods you talking about?
Well, there are services that are provided by
What
the
are the
doctors and the
goods?
systems. The goods are the products that they use to do that frozen process, the products that they use to store those embryos.
So give me a definition of what you
stores.
think goods are.
I don't have a definition in this bill.
And it's obvious because I think that's where the confusion has come when you're saying that they're providing. I think the technology that they use, I don't know if we put that under the heading of goods. The container that they would freeze the embryo in, I wouldn't put that under
That's not a good.
necessarily. It might be that container that holds that embryo. So if you're saying there is a good because there's a cost to it,
And it had to be shipped, and it had to be delivered, it had to be used. So those are some of the goods.
the truck
that I
is,
think we're
what
referring
is
to.
the device that they use to deliver it? What is that?
I guess that would be a part of the goods. The
That's part of the
transport
good.
process.
The container that holds the embryo is good, and the embryo itself is
It's a part of the services that those doctors and those families are
the
working
embryo is
with.
part of the service.
They're all working together to provide a service to those families to
I
try to
understand what it
enable
is. We're
them
just trying to
have
break
children.
down some of this terminology using because it's confusing in a sense on what you're calling goods and what you're calling services. Because at the end of the day, from my perspective, a problem was created when this body passed the abortion bill. Because in that bill you define life. And when you come into defining life, now when someone questions, well, what is an embryo? And I would think that the judge took his definition because this body and other bodies across the country in their abortion bills came up with a definition of what life is. And I think in my opinion that the only way we could solve it is that. One of the problems I had Thursday was with those embryos that are not used. Then what about them? Can they discard them?
I believe those families work with them and decide what is the best thing. That is my understanding.
And that's somewhere in black and white? Because it's not in your bill. It doesn't say that specifically.
And we're
in the
not
bill.
talking about that in the bill. We're talking about
So, and the reason I'm saying this is because at some point in time, if someone comes back and say that embryo is life, but I have embryos left that I didn't use, so if it's life, when we discard that life, is that death? Because it's defined, the embryo itself is defined as life.
And that's part of the conversation that I hope that we will work on.
So we got to work on that part.
Right.
So in that part, so from that perspective, we sort of on the fence right now as to if I have 5 embryos left and I don't need them, they have been defined as life. If I discard them before you finish working on them, would I or whoever is responsible for discarding those embryos, will they be charged with murder? We're working on it, but they live. We've already said that.
This bill gives immunity to the provider and to the
For
receiver
all of them that's left?
for the process right now.
But what about the ones
We've
that's
not
left?
gotten into that conversation yet. That's
But we
part
have
of the
to.
longer, and I hope that we do.
Because I want to know with the ones that's left is life. You might not want to talk about it, but I don't think that we can solve this problem until we look at the whole thing holistically. Because we got to know what's going to happen if a couple says that we've used 2 embryos, those 2 embryos were successfully implanted, we gave birth to them, but I've got 4 more embryos left that we don't need. So they've been defined as life. So being life with this conversation, we got to have some decision on what happens when that life is discarded. And we need to have that now, because those same doctors or whoever that have complained to get the immunity, they got to know what to do with those embryos that's left. And what happens if accidentally the electricity is turned off and those embryos that are left are thaw? What happens at that point? So it's still a lot of other questions, and I think that this body that don't pay attention anyway, they couldn't tell you what was in this bill if you beat them, because they don't pay that kind of attention. And it's just so sad for the people that come to this body to listen to us deliberate on different things that the average person in here is not paying any attention. But the outcome is going to affect a lot of families, and the outcome, even with the fertilization, the outcome as to what happened to those that are left. Because I got problems anyway when you say, and I'm gonna end on this because somebody asked me this weekend, since embryos that are frozen is life, what happens if you freeze your child for a year? When you thaw that child, is that child gonna be living? And that's the same concept with these embryos. So we got a bigger discussion than we think we got, and I think that for us to come up with something that is viable for us to work off in the medical community, and parents who have embryos since they are children, and I think I was even asked, does one parent pay child support for embryos? So it's a lot of questions and things that this body need to solve if we're talking about solving a problem that has been created when this body and other bodies across this country got into God's business to decide what was life. Thank you.
Chair thanks the lady. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Montgomery, Representative Ensler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will you yield? Great. So I'm going to vote for this because every day that goes by, I know with fertility clinics not being open, it's a major, major issue. So I do appreciate you bringing this. I do have some questions and concerns, and one, though, that I want to start with that Representative Moore was asking. Certainly part of the IVF services are then families deciding what to do with additional embryos. My understanding is it's incredibly expensive to store those. So I think we need to be abundantly clear. Does the immunity cover families deciding that what they're going to do with embryos under IVF services? Is that covered, that a family has the freedom to choose what they're going to do?
I believe that the service portion of it for those that are providing services and receiving services it's going to provide an immunity for them during the time that this is in place.
Great. Okay, no, that's encouraging. As far as the clinics themselves, have you or any of the other, or Senator Melson or others, spoken to them and their legal counsel that they feel confident that this will allow them to immediately start back up?
I feel we've talked to almost all of the lawyers around here, and we do feel confident that most of these are going to be able to open with this, and potentially all.
Great. Okay. No, and the last point, I want to echo some of my colleagues that I think it's important just to continue to recognize how we ended up here in the first place. The personhood amendment, had we not had that in place, the court wouldn't have ruled the way that they did. And that's why I am glad, and I know others have brought it up, that Leader Daniels does have a constitutional amendment. I think it's very important. I know you've said you're very open to conversations beyond this. This is what I see as a temporary kind of Band-Aid fix, which is better than nothing, but we have to look at the bigger picture to make sure, because my concern from a legal standpoint is that someone can now challenge the statute saying it violates the Constitution, and we're going to be back in the same exact place. So I hope moving forward, instead of just the statutory temporary fix, that we look at big picture, that we never have to do this again. I know there's so many people that have been here and they just shouldn't have to come and deal with this. They should be worrying about work and their families. So again, I hope that big picture, we have the constitutional amendment and make very clear that IVF, but also other reproductive care, that families in Alabama have the freedom to choose and to do that. But thank you for bringing this.
Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Question for the body now is adoption of the sub. Clerk will unlock the machine and the members will vote. Clerk will lock the machine, record the votes. 78 ayes, 6 nays. The sub has been adopted. Chairwoman Collins.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask for final passage.
That is question for the body's final passage of HB 159. Clerk will unlock the machine and the members will vote. Clerk will lock the machine, record the votes. 81 ayes, 12 nays, 9 abstention. SB 159 has passed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Chair Lady Collins. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Mobile, Pro Tem Pringle.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House stand in adjournment.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned.